What happens when a young mother, full of hope and dreams, tries to share a life-changing secret with the one person she believes she can trust? This is the heartbreaking story of 24-year-old Kyla Cooper, a woman who, like so many others, found herself in the midst of love, confusion, and ultimately, a tragic betrayal. Kyla was a mother of two, a daughter, and a sister, living a life that many would think was filled with promise. But the moment she stepped into the home of Rashad Thompson to share the news of her pregnancy, everything changed. What was supposed to be a joyous occasion turned into a confrontation that would leave her family reeling and a community shattered. She arrived unannounced, ready to share the most personal, intimate news, a secret that would forever alter her life. But instead of receiving love and understanding, she was met with anger, confusion, and betrayal. The news wasn't welcomed. And in the blink of an eye, that moment of hope turned into something far darker. But there's more to this story. Behind the closed doors of Rashad's home, there was another woman, a woman who also claimed Rashad's heart. Arkia Tate, Rashad's other girlfriend, entered the scene at the worst possible moment. What unfolded in that tense, volatile atmosphere would lead to an unimaginable act of violence. What drove Arkia to make the fatal decision that night? Was it jealousy, desperation, or something deeper? In a world where emotions run high, sometimes one argument is all it takes to turn everything upside down. And that's exactly what happened. This is not just a story about a love triangle, but about the devastating consequences of unchecked emotions, hidden relationships, and the lengths one person will go to in order to protect what they believe is theirs. What started as a conversation between two women turned deadly, one shot, one life lost, and a family left asking, how could this happen? Stay with me as we unravel this tragic tale, where the lines between love and hate blur, and the truth behind the murder remains entangled in secrets and lies. Kyla Cooper was the kind of person who believed in love, family, and the future. At 24 years old, she had two young children who were the center of her world. Kyla was full of life, always sharing moments of joy, laughter, and hope with her family and friends. She was a woman who dreamed of a better tomorrow, a fresh start, and a future where her kids could thrive. But that future would be tragically stolen in a moment of violence that no one saw coming. One night, Kyla learned she was pregnant, and the excitement and fear of that revelation compelled her to take a step that would forever alter the course of her life. She went to Rashad Thompson's house, eager to share the news. But what should have been a moment of happiness quickly turned into something far darker. An argument began to unravel, filled with anger, resentment, and hurt feelings. But the story doesn't end there. Rashad wasn't the only one with a claim to Kyla's heart. There was another woman involved, Arkia Tate, who had her own reasons to feel threatened. When Arkia entered the scene, the tension between the three of them escalated rapidly. What followed was a deadly confrontation, one that left Kyla dead on the floor and a family left to pick up the pieces. But there's more. Kyla's family, her closest loved ones, swore she was pregnant, convinced that the child inside her would change everything for Rashad. However, when the autopsy report came back, it revealed a shocking twist. The pregnancy everyone had believed was real. It was never there. How could that be? The mystery deepens. What happened that night, and why did Kyla end up dead? Was it simply jealousy, or was there something far more sinister at play? Stay with me as we delve deeper into the hidden truths behind this tragic death. We'll peel back the layers of secrets, lies, and emotions that fueled the violence that night, and try to understand why it all unfolded the way it did. Rockdale County, Georgia. A quiet, suburban area just outside of Atlanta, where the pace of life moves slower than in the bustling city. With a population of just over 17,000, it's a place where families settle down to raise children, and neighbors often know each other by name. It seems peaceful, almost idyllic. But behind the calm exterior, sometimes darkness lurks, waiting to upend the lives of those who least expect it. In this small corner of the world lived Kyla Cooper, a 24-year-old mother of two. She was full of life and devoted to her children, a mother who would do anything for her kids. Her son, just 5 years old, and her daughter, only 4, were the center of her world. They were the ones she poured all her love into. She shared their milestones, their little victories, and the everyday moments that fill a mother's heart with joy. Like many young mothers, Kyla had dreams for them, a better future, a life where her kids would never want for anything. But Kyla wasn't just a mother. She was a woman who had faced struggles, just like anyone else. She had a past, one that wasn't perfect, one that was filled with both good and bad. Kyla had been in a long relationship with her children's father, a man she had once believed was her future. They had plans, they had dreams of their own. But like so many relationships, things didn't always go as expected. The spark faded, and what had once been a partnership became a source of pain and heartbreak. They parted ways, leaving Kyla to start over again, to rebuild her life for the sake of her children. That's when she met Rashad Thompson, a man who brought a spark back into her life. He seemed like a fresh start, someone who understood her desires, her need to move forward, and her longing for a new chapter. Kyla quickly fell for him. Rashad was charming, a man who knew how to make her smile and feel special again. But Rashad's presence in Kyla's life brought with it complications that would soon escalate in ways no one could have predicted. Rashad wasn't single. He was already involved with another woman, Arkia Tate. What began as an innocent relationship for Kyla quickly became tangled in a web of emotions, jealousy, and deception. Rashad's ties to Arkia were deeper than Kyla realized, and as her relationship with him grew stronger, the tension between the two women began to simmer beneath the surface. Kyla, unknowingly, had become part of a complicated love triangle, and the stakes were about to get much higher. Kyla's new relationship wasn't just a fresh start, it was a risk, a gamble. Rashad seemed to be the man who could offer her the happiness she sought, but the truth was far more complex than she ever imagined. Behind the scenes, Arkia was just as invested in Rashad as Kyla, and the more Kyla and Rashad's relationship deepened, the more their love triangle became a ticking time bomb. And then, one fateful night, Kyla's life was changed forever. She had just learned she was pregnant, a revelation that should have brought joy. But instead, it set off a chain of events that no one could have predicted. What started as a quiet visit to Rashad's home quickly turned into a violent confrontation, forever altering the course of Kyla's life, and her family's. The moment that should have been filled with happiness would instead lead to tragedy. What went wrong that night? What sparked the deadly violence? Stay with me as we begin to untangle this web of secrets, love, and betrayal. We'll dive into the complexities of the relationships that led to Kyla's untimely death and explore the shocking truths that no one saw coming. Kyla Cooper had just discovered she was pregnant. The news came as a shock to her, but it was also a moment of truth, a moment that would change everything. As a young mother of 2, she knew that a third child would complicate her life even further, but it was still a new beginning, something she felt was worth sharing with the man who had become a central part of her life, Rashad Thompson. The discovery of the pregnancy was not something Kyla had expected, but it was something she had to face. The weight of the news was heavy on her, but there was no turning back. Her heart raced as she thought about how to tell Rashad. She knew that this news would not be easy for him to hear, especially considering the complicated dynamics of their relationship. But still, Kyla felt an overwhelming urge to tell him, to share this pivotal moment in her life. She could have waited until morning. She could have given herself time to process it, to figure out what to say. But instead, something inside her told her that she had to act immediately. She couldn't wait. She needed to tell him now. At 1 a.m., Kyla made a decision that would ultimately bring her face to face with a confrontation that would end in tragedy. She called her cousin, asking for a ride. The urgency in her voice was undeniable. This wasn't just a casual conversation she was planning. This was something that would change the course of her life. As she made her way to Rashad's home, Kyla's mind was a whirlwind of emotions, nervousness, fear, and a strange sense of excitement. This was the kind of moment she had imagined, but it wasn't exactly how she had pictured it. She was walking into an unknown situation, unsure of what Rashad's reaction would be. Would he be happy for her? Would he feel burdened by the news? Or worse, would he reject the idea altogether? But what Kyla could never have anticipated was the anger that would greet her when she arrived. Rashad was not pleased by the news. His reaction was one of confusion and frustration. He was far from the supportive partner Kyla had hoped for. The news of her pregnancy sparked an argument, one that would set the tone for everything that followed. Rashad was upset, overwhelmed by the reality of the situation. He didn't know how to react, how to feel, or even how to process the fact that Kyla was carrying his child. The argument escalated quickly. Voices were raised, accusations were thrown. The tension in the room was palpable. Rashad's confusion turned into anger, and the emotional walls between him and Kyla grew higher. The conversation was no longer about the pregnancy, it became a battle of hurt feelings, misunderstandings, and frustration. And then, in the midst of this volatile exchange, the door opened. Arkia Tate, Rashad's other girlfriend, entered the room. She was already part of Rashad's life, but Kyla had no idea that this woman was about to become the catalyst for a much more dangerous situation. Arkia's reaction was immediate, she was furious. The news of Kyla's pregnancy only deepened the tension between her and Rashad. The situation quickly spiraled out of control. The room, already charged with anger, became a battlefield of jealousy and hurt. Arkia, who had been living in the shadows of this love triangle, could no longer ignore the reality of the situation. Kyla's pregnancy, something she had no control over, was a direct threat to her own relationship with Rashad. Kyla and Arkia came face to face, both women now locked in a confrontation that would have been unimaginable just moments before. The conversation turned ugly, with harsh words exchanged, accusations flying between the two women, and Rashad caught in the middle. What began as a conversation about a new life soon turned into an explosive argument over something neither woman could fully control, the relationship they shared with Rashad. The room was thick with tension, and in those moments, everything became more than just an argument. It became about power, control, and desperation. The emotions were raw, the pain visible. Each woman felt as if she was fighting for something that mattered deeply, her place in Rashad's life. And just as the argument reached its boiling point, something darker was about to unfold. The conversation escalated quickly, and with each passing second, the atmosphere became more charged, more dangerous. What started as a verbal altercation would soon turn violent. The argument wasn't just about who was right or wrong anymore, it was about survival, about claiming something that belonged to each of them. And then, the unthinkable happened. The room, already filled with anger, suddenly became even darker. The sound of a gunshot shattered the air. What happened next would shock everyone involved. The question wasn't just about who fired the shot, it was about why it had escalated so far, so fast. How did things go from a conversation about a pregnancy to a deadly confrontation? What drove Arkia to act in such a violent manner? In just a moment, everything had changed. The tragic events that would follow were set in motion, and Kyla's life would never be the same. As the heated argument between Kyla and Arkia raged on, the atmosphere in the room became increasingly charged. What had started as a simple conversation about a pregnancy quickly escalated into a battle of emotions, power, and desperation. Each woman had a stake in the relationship with Rashad Thompson, and neither was willing to back down. Kyla was hurt. She had come to Rashad with the hope of building a future together, but instead, she found herself facing a woman who had already laid claim to his heart. Arkia, on the other hand, was equally determined to protect what she felt was hers. The jealousy and resentment that had been simmering beneath the surface boiled over as the two women exchanged words that cut deep. They weren't just fighting over Rashad anymore, They were fighting for control, for validation, and for their own place in a complicated, tangled love story. The arguments grew louder, more intense. The room was thick with anger, and every word spoken felt like a blow. Rashad, the man at the center of it all, was caught in the middle, trying to defuse the tension, but it was too late. The emotions had already spiraled out of control, and there was no turning back. The conflict between the two women seemed inevitable now. What had started as a conversation about a new life had turned into a vicious confrontation where neither woman was willing to compromise. And then, in the midst of the chaos, something changed. The argument took a turn for the worse as the situation escalated even further. Kyla and Arkia were so close to each other now, faces flushed with anger, voices raised, that it was almost impossible to tell who had the upper hand. And that's when it happened, the appearance of a gun. The sight of it was as shocking as it was sudden. In the heat of the moment, it wasn't clear where the gun had come from, or who had brought it into the confrontation. But once it was in the room, everything shifted. The tension in the air became suffocating, as if the presence of that weapon added a weight that none of them could escape from. For a brief moment, time seemed to slow down. The argument, which had already felt like it was out of control, now had the potential to escalate into something far darker. In that split second, the reality of the situation settled in. This was no longer just a verbal fight. Someone was going to get hurt. Someone was going to pay the price for the emotions, the jealousy, and the lies that had built up over time. The gun was pointed, and then, without warning, a single shot rang out. The sound was deafening. A sharp, violent crack that shattered the air and sent everyone into a frenzy. In the chaos that followed, no one was sure who had moved first, who had pulled the trigger. But the result was immediate. Kyla, the young mother, the woman who had only wanted to share her news, fell to the floor. Silence followed, broken only by the panic and confusion of those in the room. What had just happened? Was she really dead? The question hung in the air, but the reality was undeniable. The moment Kyla was shot, everything changed. Outside, a neighbor, Kashama Smith, was just trying to sleep, unaware of the tragedy unfolding in the house next door. But the sounds of the argument and then the gunshot were impossible to ignore. She later told authorities that she heard the struggle, the thumps of what seemed like a fight, followed by the unmistakable sound of a gunshot. Kashama's account was crucial, providing the first real confirmation of the violence that had erupted inside the house. In the aftermath of the gunshot, the confusion set in. Was it an accident? Was it intentional? No one seemed to know. Rashad was stunned, unable to comprehend what had just happened. Arkia, on the other hand, was not thinking about the consequences of her actions. She was thinking about the chaos, the anger that had overtaken her, and the deep emotions that had fueled the violence. But there was no time for reflection. Arkia fled the scene, running out of the house as quickly as she had entered. The house, once a place of potential and promise, was now a crime scene. Kyla was lying on the floor, her life slipping away. Rashad, left standing in the middle of it all, was overwhelmed by the reality of what had just transpired. The world around him seemed to spin, the sounds of sirens drawing nearer as the police responded to the 911 call. One shot. Just one shot, and Kyla's life was over. But the events that would follow would take the case in a completely unexpected direction. The mystery surrounding the shooting, the motivations of those involved, and the secrets that were hidden in the hours leading up to the tragedy were only beginning to unravel. What would the police discover? What truths would come to light? And, most importantly, how would this tragedy be explained to the two children who were now without their mother? As the sound of the gunshot still echoed in the air, Arkia Tate fled the scene. She bolted out of the house, leaving behind the chaos she had just unleashed. In those critical moments, Arkia knew she had just done something irreversible, something that would forever alter her life. As she ran, her mind must have raced, trying to piece together the consequences of her actions, but there was no time for second thoughts. She was already in motion, trying to get away. What followed was a desperate attempt to evade the police. Arkia was not thinking about the consequences of her actions. She was thinking about the need to escape, to distance herself from the carnage that had unfolded inside that house. But the police were quick to respond. Within minutes, officers were dispatched to the scene, and the hunt for Arkia was underway. They had a description of her car, a gray Dodge, and they wasted no time in tracking it down. The chase was intense. The police pursued Arkia down the roads of Rockdale County, and for a moment, it seemed as if she might get away. But the authorities weren't far behind. As they closed in, Arkia's escape began to falter. In a matter of minutes, the police managed to locate her vehicle and pulled her over on I-20, just 2 miles from the crime scene. Arkia was arrested without incident, her flight from the law abruptly halted. The capture of Arkia did little to ease the tension, however. While the authorities now had the woman who fired the shot, the investigation was far from over. There were still so many unanswered questions, and a key piece of the puzzle, the identity of the person who had been carrying Kyla's child, was shrouded in mystery. The autopsy report brought a new layer of confusion and shock. Kyla's family had been convinced, even to the point of proclaiming it publicly, that she was pregnant. They had believed she was carrying Rashad's child. It was a story that had been repeated by those closest to her, from her cousin who had seen her earlier in the evening to her father, who had confirmed the pregnancy news. Everyone had accepted it as fact. But when the autopsy results came back, Kyla had not been pregnant at all. The revelation left Kyla's family in disbelief. They couldn't understand how they had been so sure about something that turned out to be false. Was it a misunderstanding, or was something else at play here? The autopsy had proven that the story they had been clinging to, the reason for the argument, the spark that had lit the fire between Kyla and Arkia, was entirely wrong. This opened a new chapter in the investigation, one that raised even more troubling questions. If the pregnancy wasn't the motive, then what had truly caused the violent confrontation? Meanwhile, Rashad, the man at the center of this tragic triangle, had his own involvement in the aftermath. While Arkia was arrested for murder, Rashad Thompson was also taken into custody, but not for the crime of killing Kyla. His arrest came on unrelated charges, charges that were not directly connected to the fatal shooting. The confusion surrounding Rashad's role in the incident was palpable. Was he a witness to the events? Was he an accomplice? Or was he just as much a victim of the toxic dynamics in his relationships as Kyla had been? The authorities struggled to make sense of his involvement, and the investigation took on new complexities as they tried to piece together the true nature of his relationship with both women. The questions only continued to mount. Was Kyla's pregnancy the true reason for the violence, or was there something deeper, more troubling lurking beneath the surface? As the investigators delved further into the details of the night, they uncovered even more secrets, messages on phones, social media posts, and private conversations that painted a much darker picture of the love triangle than anyone had anticipated. The deeper the investigation went, the more the truth seemed to slip away, replaced by a tangled web of jealousy, hidden emotions, and unresolved conflicts. Was the pregnancy simply a catalyst for the explosion, or had something more insidious been festering between Rashad, Kyla, and Arkia? The investigation was only just beginning, but it was clear that this case had many layers yet to be uncovered. And the questions remained. What had really driven Arkia to violence? Was she acting out of jealousy, or was there something more personal, more painful at play? And why had Rashad, who was at the heart of it all, been so passive in the face of this escalating situation? The answers, it seemed, were buried deep beneath the surface, and only time would tell if they would ever come to light. As the investigation into Kyla Cooper's tragic death unfolded, the inconsistencies in the story became glaringly apparent. Kyla's family, who had been adamant about the pregnancy, found themselves facing the harsh reality that their understanding of the situation was completely wrong. They had believed, with certainty, that Kyla was carrying Rashad's child. They had accepted it as truth, as did the people around her. Her cousin DJ, in particular, had been the last person to speak with her just hours before the shooting. He had no doubt in his mind that Kyla was pregnant. Her father shared the same belief, and it became a focal point of the entire situation. But when the autopsy results came back, they told a different story. The truth was stark and unforgiving: Kyla was never pregnant. The autopsy had found no signs of pregnancy at all. This revelation left Kyla's family reeling. How could they have been so sure? Was there a mistake, a miscommunication somewhere along the way, or was the pregnancy simply a fabricated detail? The pregnancy had been the center of the confrontation that night, the catalyst that set everything in motion. But now, with the revelation that it didn't exist, the entire foundation of the argument seemed to crumble. If the pregnancy wasn't real, why did it matter so much? Why did it spark such a violent, life-ending encounter? The answer, it seemed, was more complex than anyone could have anticipated. If the pregnancy wasn't the root cause, what was? The investigation dug deeper, seeking to uncover the real reasons behind the violent confrontation. And then, a breakthrough came: the discovery of a message on Arkia Tate's phone. Arkia, who had been arrested after fleeing the scene, had no idea that the contents of her phone would become a key piece in understanding the true motive behind the shooting. The message, once uncovered by investigators, was a revelation that would cast everything in a new light. What it contained, however, was not immediately clear to the authorities. But it was obvious that the message could potentially unlock the deeper layers of this tragic case. Was the message a confession? Or did it reveal something far darker, perhaps hidden fears or emotions that Arkia had kept to herself? Could it explain why she had resorted to violence, to end Kyla's life in a moment of uncontrollable rage? The truth behind that message could hold the key to the entire puzzle, and yet, it left even more questions than answers. What if the real motive behind the shooting had nothing to do with jealousy or the pregnancy? What if there was something else entirely that had triggered the fatal moment? In the midst of these revelations, the pain of Kyla's family only grew. Her loved ones were left in shock and confusion, unable to fully comprehend what had happened. DJ, her cousin, who had spoken to Kyla just hours before her death, was left haunted by the last conversation he had with her. He had no idea that it would be the last time he would ever hear her voice. He had tried to reassure her, tried to be there for her as she prepared to share the news of the pregnancy. And now, with Kyla gone, DJ was left grappling with the sudden loss and the lingering questions. Her father, Ronald County, spoke out, his grief palpable. He expressed the agony of losing his daughter in such a senseless way. No parent should bury their child, he said, and his words struck a chord with everyone who heard them. There was no justification for what had happened. Kyla had simply gone to talk to Rashad. She had simply wanted to share something important, something that might have changed her life, and instead, her life was stolen from her in a moment of violence. As the investigation progressed, it became clear that the tragedy was not just a case of jealousy, but something more layered, something more complex. The pieces of the puzzle, the pregnancy, the message, the relationship dynamics, were all connected in ways that no one had fully understood. The message on Arkia's phone could hold the final piece, the last clue that would explain everything. But even with that piece, the truth behind Kyla's death may be darker than anyone could have imagined. Was the message the final piece of the puzzle, or was it just another twist in a story that was already filled with questions and uncertainty? Could it finally provide the closure Kyla's family so desperately needed, or would it only lead to more confusion? The truth behind Kyla's tragic death remained elusive, and the investigation revealed just how much more there was to uncover. What was the true motive behind Arkia's violent actions? Was it the pregnancy, the jealousy, or something deeper and darker, buried beneath the surface? For now, the answers remain unclear, and the family continues to mourn the loss of a young mother whose life was taken far too soon. But the search for the truth continues, as investigators try to untangle the web of secrets, lies, and emotions that led to Kyla's untimely death. The message on Arkia's phone might be the key, but whether it will bring the closure the family needs, or simply leave them with more questions, remains to be seen. As we reach the conclusion of Kyla's tragic story, I want to hear your thoughts. What do you think really happened that night? Do you believe jealousy was the sole motive behind this devastating act, or was there something much deeper at play? Could hidden emotions, past traumas, or unresolved conflicts have played a role in Arkia's violent outburst? Drop your thoughts and theories in the comments below. Let's have an open discussion about what drove this situation to such a devastating end. Was this just a tragic love triangle, or was there something more insidious underneath? And here's another question for you. If you were in Kyla's shoes, how would you have handled the situation? Would you have confronted Rashad with the news of the pregnancy, knowing the complexities of his relationship with Arkia? What would you have done? Let us know your thoughts on this heartbreaking case and how you believe things could have unfolded differently. I also want to remind you to hit that like button if you found this story moving. It's through your support that we can continue sharing these important stories. And don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss an update on our latest true crime cases. Your engagement helps us bring these stories to light and ensures that we keep shedding light on the truth. Thank you for being a part of this journey. Kyla's death is a stark reminder of how quickly a life can be taken, a moment of violence that escalated from something as complicated as a love triangle. In a world where emotions run high and relationships are filled with uncertainty, Kyla's story shows just how fragile life can be. In an instant, her world was turned upside down, and 2 children were left to grow up without their mother. This tragedy didn't just affect Kyla's family, it affected an entire community. Friends, loved ones, and neighbors were left shocked, grappling with the loss of someone so full of promise and potential. It serves as a powerful reminder that the effects of violence extend far beyond the victim, leaving behind a ripple of pain and confusion that lasts for years. But Kyla's story also carries a message. It serves as a warning to us all: cherish the people you love. Communicate openly, honestly, and without fear. Don't let small conflicts spiral into situations that could destroy everything you hold dear. Walk away from toxic relationships before they escalate into something irreversible. Sometimes, the hardest thing to do is walk away, but it's often the thing that will save your life, and the lives of those around you. Kyla's life was taken by violence, yes. But it doesn't have to be the last word on her story. Let her death be a reminder that we all have the power to change the course of events before it's too late. Let it inspire us to handle our emotions with care, to recognize the signs of escalating tension, and to always choose peace over rage. In the end, Kyla's story is one of heartbreak, yes, but it is also a call for justice. It's a call for us to reflect on how we handle our relationships and our conflicts. It's a call for all of us to do better. Let Kyla's memory inspire us to make better choices, to communicate more openly, and to walk away from situations that can lead to harm. May her soul rest in peace, and may her family find the justice they so deserve.